My name is Rachel Summers, and I was 29 years old when I decided to take a law course. I wasn't aiming to become a lawyer. Not exactly. My reasons were smaller, quieter, born out of frustration and a need for independence. I had been working as a paralegal for several years, doing grunt work for attorneys who dismissed me as little more than a glorified secretary. I wanted to understand the law for myself, to not just shuffle papers, but to really know what they meant. But in my family's eyes, it was a joke. I'll never forget the day I first told them. We were sitting around the dinner table at my parents' house, my older brother Mark holding court the way he always did. He was 34, smug, and never missed a chance to remind everyone he was the successful one. He owned a small construction company, built with a generous loan from my parents that he never paid back, and he acted like he was a self-made millionaire. I waited until the conversation hit a lull before I said, "I've enrolled in a law course at the university. It's a night program, so I can still work during the day." The silence lasted 3 seconds. Then Mark laughed. Loud, sharp, cruel. "A law course? You? What? Are you planning to sue parking attendants now?" Sophie, my younger sister, smirked. "God, Rachel. Why waste the money? You're not even going to be a lawyer." My mother tried to smooth things over, but even she chuckled under her breath. "Sweetheart, maybe you should focus on settling down instead of this." I felt my face flush hot. "It's not about becoming a lawyer," I muttered. "It's about knowledge. About understanding my job better." Mark leaned back in his chair, swirling his wine glass. "No offense, Rach, but you've always been the bookworm with nothing to show for it. While I'm out building things, you're what? Reading about them? This course is just another excuse to avoid the real world." I wanted to scream, to tell him that knowledge was the real world, that contracts and loopholes and clauses were the reason people like him got away with things they shouldn't. But I stayed quiet, my nails digging into the palm of my hand under the table. That night, I cried alone in my apartment, not because I doubted myself, but because once again my family had reduced me to a punchline. The mocking didn't stop. At every gathering, Mark made sure to bring it up. "Careful, don't argue with Rachel," he'd say with a smirk. "She's practically a lawyer now." Sophie would add, "Hey, maybe you can defend us if we get a parking ticket." Even my dad, who was usually quiet, joined in once. Well, as long as it keeps her busy. Each joke was a pinprick, small but relentless. Still, I kept going. I spent nights poring over textbooks, highlighting case law, practicing arguments in front of the mirror. I learned about property disputes, contract law, inheritance rights, all the things that seemed distant and irrelevant at first, but slowly began to feel like tools I was sharpening. The more they mocked me, the harder I studied. And then came the irony. The first person to need legal advice from me was Mark. It started small. One afternoon, he called me, his tone casual but with an edge of stress. "Hey, Rach, you're doing that law thing, right?" I bit back a smile. "You mean the course you called a waste of time?" Yeah, whatever. "Listen, I've got this contract with a supplier, and I think they're screwing me over. Can you look at it?" The satisfaction was sweet, but I didn't show it. "Sure. Send it over." When I reviewed it, I spotted the problem instantly. Hidden fees, vague clauses, classic traps. I pointed them out, explained his options, and even suggested a renegotiation strategy. A week later, he called again, sheepish. "So, you were right. They backed down after I brought up those points. Thanks." I waited for it, the apology, the acknowledgement, but it never came. Instead, at the next family dinner, he grinned and said, "Rachel thinks she's some big shot now, helping me with contracts. Guess all those nights with her nose in a book finally paid for something." Laughter. Again. I swallowed my rage. One day, I thought. One day, you'll choke on those laughs. That day came sooner than I expected. It started with whispers. My cousin James pulled me aside at a barbecue, lowering his voice. "Hey, Rachel, have you heard about Mark's company? He's cutting corners, using cheap materials, skipping inspections. People are starting to notice." I wasn't surprised. Mark always bragged about saving money, about being smarter than the system. But as I listened, my stomach turned. This wasn't just arrogance. It was fraud. Dangerous fraud. I tucked the information away, not sure what to do with it yet. But then came the phone call that changed everything. A former employee of Mark's, someone he had fired without severance, called me out of the blue. "Rachel, I know you're studying law. I need help. Mark cheated me. He owes me wages, and I have proof. Contracts, pay stubs. I can't afford a lawyer, but maybe you can at least tell me what to do." I agreed to meet him. And when I saw the paperwork, my heart pounded. It wasn't just one mistake. It was a pattern. Underpayment. Fake deductions. Signed contracts that Mark had blatantly ignored. It was the kind of thing that could ruin him in court. For the first time, I realized maybe my law course wasn't just about me. Maybe it was about justice. And maybe, just maybe, the person I would one day face across a courtroom wouldn't be a stranger. It would be my own brother. That night, I pulled out my textbooks again. But this time, I wasn't studying to prove a point. I was preparing for war. The box of documents sat on my coffee table like a live bomb. Contracts. Pay stubs. Emails. The former employee, his name was Luis, had dropped it off after our meeting, thanking me over and over. "I don't know what to do," he'd said, his voice shaking. "I can't afford a lawyer, but I can't let him get away with this." When he left, I stared at the paperwork for a long time. My hands trembled as I picked up the first folder. And there it was. Proof. Mark had underpaid workers, deducted equipment fees that didn't exist, and even forged signatures on agreements. The evidence was undeniable. My brother, the same man who mocked me for studying law, had built his business on lies. And I held the receipts. At first, I wasn't sure what to do. I wasn't a lawyer. I didn't want to give Luis false hope. So I called one of my old professors, a woman named Dr. Green, who had always encouraged me. When she answered, I poured the whole story out: Mark's fraud, the evidence, the fear of stepping into something bigger than I could handle. She was silent for a moment, then said, "Rachel, you've done more than most people ever would. You've spotted the pattern. You've gathered the facts. What you need now is courage. And perhaps a lawyer who will take this case on contingency." "But it's my brother," I whispered. "Then it's family betrayal," she replied. "And betrayal is still injustice. Sometimes it hurts worse because it's family. But the law doesn't care if he's your brother. The law cares if he's guilty." Her words burned into me. Still, I hesitated. At the next family dinner, I tried to act normal. I sat at the long table while Mark bragged about his latest project, waving his fork around like a king addressing his subjects. "Got the city contract locked down," he said smugly. "Easy money. Nobody does it faster than me." Sophie giggled. "That's why you're the successful one, Mark." My parents nodded in agreement, as if he hung the moon. Then Mark turned to me. "So, Rach, how's law school? Sued anyone yet?" The table erupted in laughter. I forced a smile, my nails digging into my palm under the table. I wanted to slam the documents down in front of him, to watch his smirk crumble. But I stayed quiet. Not yet. Timing was everything. Over the next few weeks, I quietly helped Luis find an employment lawyer. We organized the paperwork, drafted a timeline, and highlighted the strongest evidence. The lawyer was impressed. "This is airtight," he said, flipping through the files. "We can build a strong case. If your brother doesn't settle, this could go to trial." I felt a mix of dread and satisfaction. Trial. The word echoed in my head. I imagined standing in court, watching Mark's face as the evidence was read out loud. The same man who mocked me for wasting time on legal studies would be destroyed by the very knowledge he ridiculed. It was poetic, but it was also terrifying, because I knew my family would never forgive me. Sure enough, whispers started. One night, Sophie called me. Her tone was sugary sweet, which meant danger. "Hey, Rachel. I heard something strange today. Someone said you're helping one of Mark's ex-employees? Is that true?" My stomach tightened. "Where did you hear that?" "Oh, you know how things get around. Mark's worried, Rach. He says you're getting involved in things you don't understand. He's family. You wouldn't want to hurt him, right?" Her words dripped with manipulation. I closed my eyes. Sophie, he's cheating people. He's breaking the law. She laughed lightly. Oh, come on. Everybody cuts corners. That's business. Don't be dramatic. Anger flared in me. Fraud isn't business, Sophie. It's theft. And you know it. Her voice cooled. Well, just remember who your family is. Don't bite the hand that feeds you. Then she hung up. I sat there, my phone buzzing in my palm, fury and grief battling in my chest. Family. They always used that word like a weapon. But what about loyalty to truth? To justice? Didn't that matter more? By spring, the lawsuit was filed. The shockwave hit our family like an earthquake. My phone exploded with calls, texts, threats, and pleas. From Mark, "You're dead to me." From Sophie, "You're tearing this family apart." From Mom, "Rachel, please don't do this. We'll fix it quietly. Don't humiliate us in public." But I didn't back down. Because humiliation wasn't my doing. It was Mark's. The first court hearing was just procedural, but it was enough to send ripples through my world. I sat on the wooden bench, my hands clasped tightly in my lap. Louise sat beside me, nervous but grateful. Across the room, Mark strutted in with his expensive lawyer, his smugness replaced with tight-jawed fury. When his eyes met mine, the look he gave me was pure venom. I met it steadily. For once, he wasn't the untouchable big brother. He was a defendant. The judge scheduled future hearings. The case was moving forward. Outside the courtroom, reporters milled around. A few had already sniffed out the story, a small construction company accused of worker exploitation. One reporter asked me, "Are you really the defendant's sister?" I paused, then said, "Yes. And I'm also someone who believes no one is above the law. Not even family." The quote ran in the paper the next day. My phone lit up again with rage from my family. But deep inside, I felt a fire burning brighter. The weeks that followed were brutal. My parents stopped inviting me to dinners. Sophie unfriended me on social media. Extended relatives called to lecture me about airing dirty laundry. But there were also small victories. Luis began to smile again, his shoulders less weighed down by fear. Other former employees started coming forward, encouraged by his courage. The case grew stronger. And my own confidence grew with it. I remembered all those nights they mocked me for studying. All the times Mark said I was wasting my time. Now those same laws, those same books, were the sword I carried into battle. I wasn't just defending Luis. I was defending myself. Then came the family ambush. It was a Sunday afternoon when my parents called. "We need to talk," my mom said. "Come over. Please." I almost didn't go. But some stubborn part of me hoped, just a little, that maybe they wanted to listen. When I arrived, the living room was full. My parents, Sophie, and Mark. He looked at me like I was dirt. "This is to stop," my dad said firmly. "You're tearing this family apart." I clenched my fists. No. Mark is tearing this family apart with his lies and theft. Mark leaned forward, his eyes blazing. "You think you're clever, don't you? Reading some books, playing lawyer. You don't know what you're doing. You're going to regret this." I met his glare evenly. "The only thing I regret is not standing up sooner." Silence fell, heavy and choking. Finally, my mom whispered, "Rachel, if you go through with this, you're no longer welcome here." The words sliced through me. But instead of crying, I stood tall. "Then so be it," I said softly. "Because I'd rather lose a family who doesn't respect me than lose myself." And I walked out. That night, I sat alone in my apartment, staring at the city lights outside my window. My chest ached with grief, but beneath it was steel. They had mocked me. They had dismissed me. Now they had disowned me. But in court, I still had a voice. And I planned to use it. The silence after that Sunday confrontation felt different from before. For years, my family had filled my phone with jabs, mockery, and sarcastic texts about my little law hobby. Now there was nothing. No calls. No invitations. No updates. Just silence, cold, intentional, final. I was out. Part of me wanted to collapse, to beg them to let me back in, to swallow my pride just to feel like their daughter and sister again. But another part, the part that had sat through hours of legal lectures, that had highlighted thousands of lines of case law, knew better. If family was conditional, then maybe it wasn't family at all. And I had bigger things to focus on. The lawsuit was moving forward quickly. Discovery had begun, which meant Mark's business practices were no longer secrets hidden in a filing cabinet. They were evidence. I spent nights helping Luis's lawyer sort through boxes of documents, drafting summaries, and preparing timelines. It was grueling, but it lit a fire in me I hadn't felt before. For once, my brain, my so-called wasted education, wasn't just useful. It was vital. Luis grew more confident with each step. "I couldn't have done this without you," he said one evening as we sat surrounded by files. I smiled faintly. "You could have. But I'm glad you didn't have to." Every time I looked at him, I thought of all the workers like him, people Mark had stepped on to climb higher. And every time I thought of that, my resolve hardened. This wasn't just about me anymore. Then came the depositions. I wasn't required to attend, but I went anyway. Watching Mark squirm under oath was something I couldn't miss. He walked in wearing a tailored suit, his lawyer at his side. He still had that swagger, but there was a twitch in his jaw he couldn't hide. When the questions began, the mask slipped. "Mr. Summers," the lawyer asked, flipping through papers, "can you explain why employee pay stubs show deductions for equipment rental fees when your company doesn't own or lease any such equipment?" Mark shifted. "It's standard industry practice." "Is it? Because I've worked on dozens of construction cases, and I've never seen this before. Can you provide documentation to justify those deductions?" Mark's lawyer jumped in, objecting. But the damage was done. Mark's face flushed red, his bravado crumbling. I sat in the back of the room, silent but savoring every second. For the first time, he wasn't the untouchable big brother. He was just another man caught in his own lies. But with every step forward in court, my family pulled further away. One evening, I ran into Sophie at the grocery store. She was pushing a cart with her 2 kids, and when she saw me, her face hardened. "Rachel," she said curtly. "Sophie," I replied. We stood there for a moment, the hum of refrigerators filling the silence. Finally, she hissed, "You're destroying him. Do you even care what this is doing to Mom and Dad?" Anger surged in me. "Do you care what he did to his employees? To Luis? To the people he robbed?" She shook her head. "You've always been jealous. That's all this is. Jealousy dressed up as justice." The words cut deep, because they weren't just hers. They were the narrative my family had chosen to believe. That I was bitter, envious, and petty. I wanted to scream that it wasn't true. But instead, I simply said, "Believe what you want. The truth will come out in court." Her lips curled into a bitter smile. "We'll see." She pushed past me, her children trailing behind, and I stood there gripping my basket, heart pounding. The weeks leading up to the trial were some of the hardest of my life. I worked my day job, studied case law at night, and spent weekends helping Luis's legal team. The stress took its toll. I lost weight, slept poorly, and felt my hands tremble whenever my phone buzzed with another article about the case. Reporters were circling, hungry for details. "Local contractor accused of wage theft," the headlines read. Mark's company was bleeding clients, his reputation unraveling. And I was the reason. At least, that's how my family saw it. But when I looked at Luis, when I saw the hope in his eyes, I knew I couldn't stop. Then came the day I never expected. Mark showed up at my apartment. It was late evening, and I was buried in paperwork when the knock came. I opened the door and froze. He stood there in jeans and a jacket, no suit, no smirk. Just exhaustion. "Can we talk?" he asked quietly. Every instinct screamed at me to slam the door. But instead, I stepped aside. He sat at my table, looking smaller than I'd ever seen him. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Finally, he said, "You're killing me, Ratch." I crossed my arms. "You did this to yourself." He shook his head. You don't understand. If this goes to trial, I lose everything. The business, the house, everything. Then maybe you shouldn't have built it on lies. His eyes flashed with anger, but only for a second. Then he slumped forward, burying his face in his hands.
Please.
Help me. You know the law. You know how this works. Just make it go away. I stared at him, stunned. This was my brother, the man who laughed in my face, who mocked me for years. Now begging. For a moment, a wave of pity washed over me. But then I remembered Luis's hollow cheeks, his fear of eviction, his kids who went without Christmas presents because Mark withheld his pay. No, I said firmly. His head snapped up. No. That's right.
No.
I won't help you cheat your way out of this. The only way out is through accountability. His face twisted with rage. You're not family anymore. I met his glare steadily. Maybe I never was. He stormed out, slamming the door so hard the frame rattled. I sat there shaking, tears stinging my eyes. But beneath the grief was steel. He thought he could break me with guilt. He was wrong. The trial date was set. Walking into the courthouse that morning felt surreal. The building loomed tall, its marble steps cold under my shoes. I clutched my notebook to my chest like armor. Luis walked beside me, his face pale but determined. We're really doing this, he whispered. Yes, I said. We are. Inside, the courtroom buzzed with energy. Reporters filled the benches. Lawyers shuffled papers. The judge entered, and silence fell. When the clerk read the case name aloud, Summers versus Summers Construction, a shiver ran down my spine. This was it. Mark sat across the aisle, glaring at me, his expensive lawyer whispering in his ear. My parents sat behind him, stone-faced. Sophie, too, her arms crossed tightly. And me? I sat on the other side, not as a lawyer, not as a client, but as a witness to the truth. When the opening statements began, I felt a strange calm settle over me. For years, I had been their punchline. Now, I was the reason Mark was fighting for his future in front of a judge. And the irony wasn't lost on me. That night, I sat in my apartment, replaying the day's events. The case would take weeks, maybe months, but it had begun. And no matter how it ended, I had already won something more important.
Respect.
Not from my family, they were too far gone, but from myself. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. The courtroom has a strange way of making time feel both slow and fast. On the second day of trial, as I sat behind Luis and his lawyer, the air felt heavy with tension. Reporters filled the benches, their pens scratching furiously with every objection and response. My parents sat stiffly on Mark's side, their eyes avoiding mine. Sophie wouldn't even glance at me. It didn't matter. My focus was on Mark. He looked different here. Less untouchable. Less smug. The courtroom stripped away his bravado, leaving only the man who had something to lose. And I was determined to make sure he did. The first witnesses were called. Former employees. Luis's lawyer asked questions calmly, methodically. The workers spoke about missing paychecks, deductions they never understood, promises that never materialized. One woman described being fired after questioning why her paycheck was hundreds less than what was agreed upon. Mark's lawyer cross-examined aggressively, trying to paint them as disgruntled employees with grudges. But the more he pressed, the more consistent their stories became. The pattern was undeniable. And when the judge asked for documentation, Luis's lawyer presented the copies we had painstakingly organized. The numbers spoke louder than words. I glanced at Mark. For the first time, he looked nervous. His jaw twitched, his fingers drummed on the table. It was a small victory, but it was sweet. During a break, I stepped out into the hallway for air. The marble walls echoed with footsteps and murmurs from other cases. That's when I heard her voice. Rachel. I turned. It was my mother. She looked tired, her makeup smudged, her hands clasped tightly around her purse. Why are you doing this? She asked softly. I swallowed hard. Because it's right, Mom. Because he's guilty. Her eyes filled with tears. But he's your brother. I shook my head.
No.
He stopped being my brother the moment he stole from people who trusted him. Her lips trembled. Families forgive. Families protect each other, I said. He never protected me. And he didn't protect his workers either. So, why should I protect him? Her tears fell silently. For a moment, I almost reached out. But then she whispered, "You're cruel," and turned away. I stood there, my chest aching, the echo of her words heavier than any verdict. When court resumed, it was Mark's turn to testify. He walked to the stand with forced confidence, his suit crisp, his smirk barely in place. But as the questioning began, cracks appeared. "Mr. Summers," Louise's lawyer asked, "did you personally authorize the deductions listed on these pay stubs?" Mark hesitated.
I
don't handle payroll directly." "So, you're saying someone else inserted false deductions?" "I didn't say false," Mark snapped. "Then what do you call a $150 equipment rental fee charged every 2 weeks, when no such equipment was ever provided?" Mark's face reddened. "That's standard overhead." The lawyer raised an eyebrow. "Overhead that your employees had to pay for out of their wages?" Objection. Overruled. The tension in the room thickened. I watched Mark squirm, his charm useless under oath. For once, he wasn't in control. When the defense tried to redirect, Mark slipped further. His lawyer asked, "Didn't you provide valuable opportunities for these employees?" "Yes," Mark said quickly. "I gave them jobs when nobody else would." "And did you ever intend to cheat them?"
No.
"Of course not." Louise's lawyer rose again. "Then why, Mr. Summers, do multiple employees have identical complaints of underpayment? Why are there consistent deductions with no basis? And why are your own financial records showing inflated profits during the same periods these workers were shorted?" Mark stammered. I don't recall." The judge leaned forward. "You don't recall, or it didn't happen?" Mark's silence said it all. That night, the trial made the evening news. The headline read, "Local contractor accused of wage theft, sister on opposing side." My face was blurred in the background, but the story spread quickly. At work, co-workers whispered. At the grocery store, strangers stared. Some looked at me with sympathy, others with judgment. But I held my head high, because for once I wasn't hiding. The trial dragged on. Witness after witness. Document after document. Every day chipped away at Mark's defenses. One afternoon, as I left the courthouse, a reporter rushed up. "Rachel, do you regret helping the case against your own brother?" I paused, looking straight into the camera. "I regret that my brother forced me into this position. I regret that he chose greed over integrity. But I don't regret standing up for the truth." The clip went viral locally. People began messaging me, some supportive, others hostile. My family predictably sent me nothing. I had become both hero and traitor, depending on who you asked. But I knew which role mattered. Then came the crossfire. Mark's lawyer tried to paint me as biased. He suggested that I had influenced Louise, that I was pushing the case out of personal vendetta. "Ms. Summers," he asked during questioning, "isn't it true that you've had a difficult relationship with your brother for years?" "Yes," I said evenly. "Because he's always dismissed me, belittled me, and treated others unfairly. And this case proves I was right to see him that way."
He smirked.
"So, this isn't about justice. It's about revenge?" I leaned forward, my voice steady. "If justice feels like revenge to you, maybe you should ask why." The courtroom murmured. The judge banged her gavel for silence. But in that moment, I knew I'd won something. Maybe not the case yet, but the narrative. During recess, Mark glared at me across the hallway. "You think you're smart," he spat. "But you're nothing. Just a bitter little girl who couldn't stand being in my shadow." I stepped closer, my voice low. "If your shadow is built on stolen wages and lies, then yes. I'll burn it down." His face twisted with rage. For once, he had no comeback. As the trial neared its end, both sides prepared closing arguments. Louise's lawyer laid out the evidence with precision. The deductions, the forged signatures, the inflated profits. He spoke about fairness, dignity, and trust, values Mark had shattered. Then Mark's lawyer stood, trying to spin a story of a hard-working businessman misunderstood by disgruntled employees. But it felt hollow, forced. Even Mark's own posture betrayed him, his eyes darting nervously, his hands fidgeting. And then it was over. The judge announced she would deliver the verdict in a week. That week was the longest of my life. I went to work, tried to sleep, but my mind replayed every word, every look, every accusation. I thought about my parents' faces, their disappointment. I thought about Sophie's bitterness. But most of all, I thought about Mark, the brother who mocked me for studying law, who laughed at my dreams, who never imagined I'd be the one to bring him down. And soon, the verdict would decide if justice agreed with me. The courthouse smelled of old wood and nerves. It was verdict day. I walked up the marble steps with my stomach in knots, clutching my notebook to my chest. Luis walked beside me, pale but steady. Behind us, reporters swarmed, their cameras flashing. Inside, the atmosphere buzzed with quiet tension. Mark sat at the defense table, his lawyer whispering urgently in his ear. My parents sat directly behind him, Sophie at their side. Their faces were stone, their eyes cold. I slid into my seat behind Luis and exhaled slowly. Whatever happened today, it was out of my hands. The judge entered, and the room rose. When we sat again, my pulse pounded in my ears. "This court has reviewed the evidence," the judge began, her voice calm but commanding. "Testimony from employees, financial records, and payroll documents show a consistent and intentional pattern of wage theft and fraudulent deductions." My breath caught. "Therefore, this court finds in favor of the plaintiffs." The words rang in my head like bells. Luis squeezed my hand, his eyes filling with tears. Relief swept over me so hard I nearly collapsed. But the judge wasn't finished. Damages are awarded in the amount of $450,000 to be paid by Summers Construction, and punitive fines are imposed for fraudulent practices. This matter will also be referred to the district attorney's office for review of possible criminal charges. A gasp rippled through the courtroom.
I turned to look at Mark.
His face had gone pale. His mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. My parents leaned forward, whispering frantically, Sophie clutching his arm. And me? I sat straighter than I ever had in my life. The brother who mocked me, who sneered at my waste-of-time law course, had just been destroyed by the very thing he ridiculed. Outside the courthouse, microphones and cameras swarmed. "Rachel, how do you feel about your brother being found guilty of wage theft?" a reporter shouted. I took a breath, the weight of years of humiliation pressing on my shoulders. Then I said clearly, "I feel sad that my brother chose greed over integrity. But I feel proud that justice was served. No one, family or not, is above the law." The clip played on every local news channel that night. My phone buzzed nonstop. Strangers messaged me their support. Old friends congratulated me. But from my family, silence. That silence broke 2 nights later. I was making tea when my doorbell rang. When I opened it, my father stood there. "Dad," I whispered. He looked older than I remembered, his shoulders slumped, his eyes tired. "Can I come in?" I nodded. We sat at my small kitchen table, the steam from our mugs curling in the air. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Finally, he said, "You ruined your brother." I stiffened.
No.
"He ruined himself." He shook his head. "Families are supposed to protect each other. You turned on him." Anger burned in my chest. Protect him? While he stole from people who could barely feed their kids. While he forged documents and lied. That's not protecting. That's enabling. My father's jaw tightened. "You could have handled it quietly. You didn't have to humiliate us." I slammed my mug down. Us? Or him? Because the only person humiliated here is Mark, and he earned it. Silence hung heavy. Finally, my father stood. His eyes glistened, but his voice was firm. "You're no daughter of mine." The words cut deeper than any verdict. He walked out, leaving the door swinging shut behind him. I stood there, shaking, tears blurring my vision. For years, I had dreamed of my family finally respecting me. Instead, they had erased me completely. The next week, the fallout grew worse. Sophie posted a long rant online about selfish siblings who destroy their families for attention. She painted me as jealous, bitter, and cruel. Comments flooded in, some defending her, others attacking me. I read them all with a hollow ache in my chest. At work, people whispered. Some treated me like a hero, others like a traitor. Even grocery shopping became an ordeal. Neighbors stared, some with pity, some with disdain. But when I saw Luis's kids smiling with relief, when he told me he could finally pay his rent and buy groceries without fear, I knew I'd made the right choice. Justice was never clean, but it was necessary. Then came the letter. It arrived one evening in a plain envelope, slipped under my door. Rachel, you think you've won.
But you've destroyed this family.
Don't expect us to forgive you. Don't expect us to ever welcome you again. You're dead to us. There was no signature, but I knew it was Sophie. I crumpled the paper in my fist, tears stinging my eyes. Dead to us. But as I sat there, staring at the walls of my tiny apartment, I realized something. I wasn't dead. I was alive in a way I had never been before. Because for the first time, I wasn't living for their approval. I was living for myself. The weeks passed. Mark's company collapsed under the weight of fines and lawsuits. His name was ruined in the community. Rumors swirled that he might face criminal charges next. And me? I finished my law course with top marks. When the professor handed me my certificate, she smiled warmly. You've been through hell, Rachel. But you've come out stronger. Don't stop here. You have the mind for this. Go further. I held the certificate in my hands, tears filling my eyes. The same piece of paper my brother mocked had become the weapon that destroyed him, and the shield that protected me. One evening, as I walked home from class, I passed a construction site. Workers were laughing, their hard hats tilted back, their hands dirty but proud. I thought of Luis, of the others who had testified, of the countless people who had been stepped on by men like Mark. And I realized, this wasn't just my fight. It was bigger. The law wasn't just about punishment. It was about fairness. And maybe, just maybe, my future wasn't about being a paralegal anymore. Maybe it was about becoming the lawyer my brother never believed I could be. The family I lost still haunted me. Holidays were lonely. Birthdays passed without a call. The ache of rejection lingered like a bruise. But when I looked in the mirror, I saw someone new. Someone stronger. Someone who had faced betrayal, ridicule, and loss, and chosen justice anyway. And in that reflection, I found something I had been searching for all along. Respect. From the only person who mattered.
Me.
Life, after the verdict, felt like walking through the ashes of a fire I had set myself. The blaze was necessary, burning down my brother's lies, his business, the pedestal my family had put him on. But when the flames died, I was left staring at the blackened wreckage of what used to be my family. Days blurred into weeks. I went to work, went to class, came home to my apartment, and repeated the cycle. The silence from my parents was deafening. Sophie's online posts still popped up occasionally, cruel jabs meant to make sure everyone knew I was the selfish traitor. And yet, despite the ache, I felt freer than ever. One evening, I stayed late after class, talking with Dr. Green. She leaned across her desk, her sharp eyes fixed on me. You've been doing extraordinary work, Rachel. Have you considered law school? The question startled me. Law school? As in becoming a lawyer? She smiled. Why not? You have the aptitude, the passion. You've already lived through a case most students wouldn't see until years into practice. You're ready. I laughed nervously. I don't know if I could handle more debt. Or the pressure. Her expression softened. Pressure makes diamonds. Don't let fear keep you from what you're capable of. Her words echoed in my mind for days. Could I? After everything? The thought terrified me. But it also lit a spark I couldn't ignore. Meanwhile, the fallout for Mark worsened. His company officially shut down. His house went on the market. Rumors swirled that the district attorney was building a criminal case. I told myself I didn't care, that I had gotten what I wanted. But deep down, I knew Mark wasn't done. Men like him never surrendered quietly. That truth hit me one rainy Friday night when there was a pounding at my door. I opened it and froze. Mark stood there, soaked through, his eyes wild. "Rachel," he rasped. "Let me in." Every instinct screamed no. But before I could close the door, he shoved past me, stumbling into the apartment. He looked nothing like the brother I had grown up with. His suit was wrinkled, his hair unkempt, his face drawn and desperate. "What are you doing here?" I demanded, slamming the door shut. He turned to me, his eyes blazing. "You have to fix this." I laughed bitterly. "Fix what? Your lies? Your fraud? The company you destroyed?" "You don't understand," he snapped. "They're going to charge me." "Prison, Rachel." "I can't go to prison." I crossed my arms. "You should have thought about that before you stole from your workers." He stepped closer, his voice dropping.
Please.
"You know the law. You know how to twist it. Help me." The audacity made my skin crawl. After everything, after mocking me, betraying me, dragging my name through the mud, he had the nerve to beg for my help. "No," I said firmly. His face twisted. "You're really going to let your own brother rot in prison? You're not my brother anymore." The words came out sharp, final. For a moment, he just stared at me, breathing hard. Then his expression darkened. "You'll regret this, Rachel." He stormed out, slamming the door behind him. I sank into a chair, trembling. I wasn't scared, not exactly. But I knew that was his warning shot. His last desperate attempt to pull me back under his control. And it only made me more certain. I needed to move forward. The next week, I requested information packets from law schools. I spread them out across my table, flipping through admissions requirements, tuition costs, program structures. It felt daunting. Impossible, even. But then I remembered Mark's face in that courtroom, the way his smugness crumbled under the weight of the law I had once been mocked for studying. I remembered Luis's relief, the way his kids hugged him after the verdict. And I realized I wanted to keep fighting for people like him. Not just once.
Not just by accident.
For real. For the first time in years, I let myself imagine a future where my family's laughter wasn't the soundtrack of my life. A future where my brother's downfall wasn't just revenge. It was the beginning of something bigger. But before I could step into that future, Mark tried one more time to drag me back. It came in the form of a letter from his lawyer. "Rachel Summers, we demand you cease all public commentary on the Summers construction case. Any further statements will be considered defamation and subject to legal action." I laughed when I read it. Defamation? The truth couldn't be defamation. Still, I took the letter to Dr. Green. She read it, snorted, and tossed it onto her desk. Empty threats. They're grasping at straws. If he had a leg to stand on, he wouldn't be bankrupt.
Her confidence soothed me.
But the letter was proof of something else. Mark was flailing. And desperate men did dangerous things. That danger arrived at my workplace. One morning, my manager pulled me into her office, looking uncomfortable. "Rachel, I got a call from your brother." My stomach sank. "What did he say?" "He suggested you were unstable, that you've been stirring up drama, that you might not be focused on your work." Shame and fury crashed into me all at once. "That's a lie." "I know," she said gently. "But I need to warn you. He's trying to ruin your reputation." I clenched my fists. He wasn't just going down. He was trying to drag me with him. But I refused to let him. That night, I sat at my kitchen table, law school packets spread out before me, Mark's letter crumpled in the trash, my manager's words echoing in my ears. I could let his threats derail me. I could curl back into the frightened sister who cried when her family laughed at her. Or I could do what I had always done. Keep studying, keep fighting, keep proving that the law wasn't just a hobby. It was my future. I picked up the application forms and started filling them out. Line by line. Word by word. Because if my brother thought he could silence me, he hadn't learned a thing. The next day, I mailed the first application. As the envelope slid into the mailbox, a wave of calm washed over me. Mark had taken my family, my peace, even my name in the community. But he couldn't take my future. That belonged to me. And for the first time, I couldn't wait to see what came next. The day I dropped my law school application into the mailbox felt like pressing a reset button on my life. For years, I had been the sister who couldn't measure up, the daughter mocked for dreaming too small, the paralegal who did grunt work while others took credit. And yet, with one envelope, I was finally choosing myself, not my family's approval, not my brother's shadow, not anyone's expectations. Just me. But stepping into that future didn't erase the past. Mark was still out there, desperate, angry, and crumbling. And he wasn't done lashing out. 2 weeks later, I heard the news. The district attorney had filed criminal charges.
Fraud.
Wage theft.
Forgery.
It was official. Mark wasn't just disgraced. He was facing prison. The news spread like wildfire. Reporters camped outside his house. Former clients distanced themselves. Old friends suddenly didn't know him that well. And my family? They doubled down on denial. My mother posted online about how cruel the world is to hardworking men. Sophie ranted about traitors in the family. Even my father, who had once been so steady, was spotted storming out of a town meeting when someone mentioned Mark's name. And me? I stayed quiet. I didn't need to gloat. The law was doing exactly what it was meant to do. One evening, as I left class, I spotted someone waiting by my car. My stomach tightened when I realized it was Sophie. Her arms were crossed, her face cold. "Can we talk?" she asked. I nodded cautiously. She stepped closer, her voice sharp. "You've destroyed him, Rachel. Do you get that? He's not just losing his business. He could go to prison." I swallowed. He did this to himself. "No," she snapped. "You did this. You and your stupid law obsession. You couldn't just let him be. You had to prove you were smarter, better." Anger rose in me, hot and fierce. Smarter? Better? Sophie, he stole from people. He forged signatures. He ruined lives. That's not being a brother. That's being a criminal. Her lip curled. "You're pathetic. You don't have a husband, no kids, no family. All you have is this case. And when it's over, what will you have left?" The words cut deep, but I forced myself to stand tall. "I'll have something you'll never have, self-respect." Her face twisted with rage. "You're dead to us." She spun on her heel and stormed away. I leaned against my car, shaking, tears stinging my eyes. But deep down, I knew she was wrong. I wasn't dead. I was alive in a way I had never been before. By summer, the criminal case moved forward. I wasn't called to testify, but I followed every headline, every update. Mark's arrogance faded quickly. His expensive lawyers argued, but the evidence was overwhelming. Employees testified again. Financial records spoke louder than excuses. And in the end, the jury delivered the verdict everyone expected: guilty. Mark Summers, my brother, was sentenced to 3 years in prison. When I read the headline, I felt a strange mix of grief and relief. Grief for the brother I had once looked up to. Relief that justice had finally been done. I didn't go to the sentencing. I didn't need to see him led away in handcuffs. I had already seen enough. A few days later, I got a letter. Not from Sophie. Not from my parents. From Mark. The handwriting was messy. The words scrawled. "Rachel, I hate you for what you did. But I also know you were right. Maybe prison will make me see that. Or maybe I'll just come out hating you more. Either way, you'll always be my sister, whether I want to admit it or not." I read the letter 3 times, my heart heavy. It wasn't an apology.
Not really.
But it was the closest thing I'd ever get. I folded it carefully and tucked it into my notebook. Reminder of everything I had survived. Life moved on. I was accepted into law school with a partial scholarship. When the letter came, I sat on my couch and sobbed, not because I doubted myself, but because I finally believed I could do it. At orientation, I walked into a room full of students younger than me, their faces eager and uncertain. For a moment, I felt out of place. Too old, too scarred. But then I remembered the courtroom, the witnesses, the verdict. I wasn't just another student. I was someone who had lived the law before ever stepping into this building. And that made me stronger. The holidays that year were hard. No calls. No invitations. I saw photos online of my family gathered around a tree without me. But instead of crying, I decorated my own small apartment. I invited friends from class, coworkers, even Luis and his family. We laughed, ate, exchanged simple gifts. It wasn't the Christmas I grew up with. It was better. Because it was real. One night, as the year ended, I stood by my window, looking out at the city lights. I thought about everything I had lost, my family, their approval, the illusion of belonging. And I thought about everything I had gained, my freedom, my strength, my future. I remembered the first time Mark laughed at me for taking that law course, how small I felt, how stupid. And I smiled. Because in the end, the very thing they mocked me for had become my weapon, my shield, my path forward. I had faced my brother in court. I had watched him fall. And I had risen. The story wasn't neat. It wasn't tied with a bow. My family was still broken. My heart still carried scars. But justice had been served. And I was no longer afraid to stand alone. Because standing alone meant standing tall. And for the first time in my life, that was enough.